What's up? My name is Mike Yakovlev, and it's been a minute. It's been like a couple minutes. I put out those Akira inspired renders, and they did really well, like crazy well. I went from about like 4,000 or 5,000 followers to 20,000. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Like I'm baffled, but I'm excited. I think it's really cool. I feel like it's been a long time coming, something like that. Got some new patrons. Super grateful to the support. Getting more Gumroad downloads as usual. You know, a lot of the stuff on there is free, but I recently released a mega wallpaper pack because of these animations and how well they're doing. And I am gonna be getting stuff on Wallpaper Engine, so those of you who are asking about that, that's definitely coming up. But yeah, the wallpapers you can get on Gumroad. You can also get them on my Patreon. If you're a patron, you'll just get them automatically. The big thing is that the popularity of these Cyberpunk scenes has kind of changed a little bit of my plans. Like before I did the Cyberpunk videos and everything like that you see on my channel, I did have some background plans of like, okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make these asset packs and I'm gonna make videos and post them to Patreon and release the packs and everything like that. But this is, for me, more exciting and seems to be more exciting for everyone else. So I'm gonna kind of focus more on this, at least for now. There's a couple other questions just about how I did the videos and the process and everything like that, but we'll just jump straight into the blend file and we'll just kind of go through and I'll explain several key moments and how things are done. So yeah, let's jump into it. So here's the first scene. This was kind of like my first attempt at this using some buildings from Kitbashed. And I really liked the way that the atmosphere worked and the lighting and the scaling and everything like that. And I've actually since tried to replicate it, but didn't quite get it. So instead, I'm just gonna go back to the scene where it worked and then just swap in my buildings and do it that way. And these buildings you can download from Gumroad for free. You can just download for free. So essentially, you can probably download the buildings and then watch this breakdown and kind of get it pretty similar. Some other people have tried and they've got it pretty close. So I'm confident that you can do it too. Yeah, after that, I'm just gonna start blocking out the scene. I have the reference pulled up on a second monitor, and here's kind of like the reference that I'm looking at specifically. On the left here, I opened up a second window to see what the camera sees, to kind of keep it always locked into what the camera sees. And then on the right side, I'm doing a lot of the overview, the block out, the scene building, and just dropping in the buildings that I feel like fit the reference the best. So yeah, I'm keeping a close eye on the reference and the layout of the buildings in relation to the camera and in specifically the camera angle, and then I'm blocking out the scene. And in previous versions of this kind of these scenes, I've also animated the camera to move past the scene. So like in this first one, the camera is kind of like going around the scene, but in this one, I was like, the camera just needs to go straight. It doesn't, it's because the idea is that it's going along a road, and that's where like the parallax effect comes from. I think I ended up changing it so that the camera stays still because it was just easier to move the buildings versus moving the buildings and having the camera move. And you'll kind of see that later on. But here I'm just like double checking, letting it play back over and over again, adjusting things as it's playing back in real time, and seeing where the camera starts versus where the camera ends, and then where all the buildings are in frame, and if it makes sense through the parallax, and if it makes sense through the perspective and how everything is moving. So I think it looks pretty good here from the camera's point of view, and I'm just doing a little bit of cleaning up on the front two buildings. I think it looks pretty good, but you can see because the camera is moving and then that building is also moving in the frame, it's moving like it's stuck to the camera almost. So I'm trying to figure that out, but you can see the building is moving with it, and it's all like a timing thing. But when I look back at the reference, I'm noticing that the buildings are doing more movement than the camera itself. So right there, I just delete the keyframes of the I delete the keyframes of the camera, have the camera stay still, and from there then I'm gonna start keyframing in just the buildings, and already it's starting to look better. It's also easier for me to just manage that instead of both at the same time. And then because these are my buildings and this is how I expect other people to use them, I'm just gonna kit bash them in a sense, where I want it to look more dense and like there's more rows of windows. So I just duplicate the building and then stick it right on top of itself. At this point, I kind of have the main elements of what I want, but I'm just watching the animation on my second monitor and having this animation just loop back and forth over and over again. And that's really all I'm doing. It's just a lot of this fine tuning, this tweaking of like what looks right, what feels right. And it's purely just going off of like composition. So I'm just looking at the camera and I'm looking at what the camera sees. I'm not really paying attention to the rest of the environment. I'm just looking at making sure the effect is being sold. So here I'm just using like the little marker tool to mark out if the building is actually going up or if it's staying the same. Because even I can't tell, like as I'm making this, the optical illusion of everything is like tripping me out. So I gotta go back to the reference, look at it and be like, is this building moving up or is it moving down? You know, like there's a bit of just following the reference and a bit of, as I'm following the reference, I'm understanding how this effect works. Because, you know, obviously when they did a cell animation, it's just like, it's flat pieces that are being moved around. The camera's not moving. It's all like, and starting to block out like the background scene. Again, just really looking at the reference and noticing that the background buildings in the reference are not super detailed. They're just like blocks with windows painted on them, but there's still some more like dimensionality and perspective to them. So I'm using what few assets I have left in this pack and just seeing like, does this wall right here make sense? Does this create enough interesting geometry and like angles and textures and things that make it interesting, make it not too distracting? Should I bring it forward? Should I push it back? And that's just all of the things that I'm thinking as I'm moving these buildings around. Again, kind of looking at the reference as like what works in the reference and then seeing how I can get that to work in my render, but not copying it like one for one, if that makes sense. So to double check that, I'm gonna go into the textured view, into like just rendered view for Eevee. And here I'm gonna start getting a good idea of where it's distracting, where it's not. And the lighting I haven't even really messed with. It's just kind of like the default lighting from the leftover scene. So you can see the lighting is kind of clipping into the building. But I'm gonna darken that little Passepartout thing, that setting, so I can just purely focus on what's in frame. And I'm just gonna kind of switch here. So the right side is gonna be the rendered view, and then the left side is my overview. And you can see that like the building's just taking up, it's too distracting, and the top of it, there's no lights. So you're kind of losing that effect of all these dense buildings with lights. So I'm gonna probably stick with this layout here, and that's probably gonna be the layout I use for the rest of the shot. And it's a bummer because I really like that other building, but it's just for this scene, it's not gonna work because again, the focus needs to stay on that center building with the blue edge, and the background just needs to be almost like a sea of lights and nothing else. All right, so I think I got it to a pretty good spot here. The buildings are moving in a good way. I'm gonna start adjusting the lighting. And this stage is probably the longest stage. So in previous videos, I explained that I have these like shadow maker lights, and that's kind of what I'm gonna mess with here first. And that's just like a light set to a negative value, and it like creates a shadow. But I do like the effect, and I want this foreground building to be in shadow, to be dark, because there's all this light, this ambient light kind of coming from the world and from all the other lights in the scene, but I want to art direct the lighting more. So I want the foreground building, the one on the left, to be almost completely in shadow, and then I want the building to the right be also in shadow, and then just kind of get lighter from there. But I'm also, using compositional elements like putting dark things in front of bright things in front of dark things, and those kind of layering effects. So that's kind of where a lot of the time goes into for these renders, which is setting up the lighting and making sure there's an area light pointed at everything where I want light, and then a kind of a shadow light where I want there to be a shadow or where I want to absorb the light. And this probably took maybe like 50% of the time, just taking the area lights, adjusting them, what looks right, what's a little too strong, what's not strong enough. I also parent the lights to the building so that they move with the thing. The light like doesn't change, so the buildings are like in light and in shadow specifically. And if the building is moving, the light stays with them. I'm learning a lot from trying to do these things. Like if the camera is inside the volume versus if it's outside the volume cube, that can give you a different look. How close the camera is to the building, how deep inside the volume cube it is. There's all these different factors. And it really is just going to come down to just kind of going by eye and making sure it looks like how I want it to. Outside of just adjusting the lighting, I'm also looking at the color of the light, the if it's creating shadows, if it's creating unwanted shadows, because I do want the background to be just almost blown out and glowing and super hazy. So the lights there, I'm making them less saturated, and I'm trying to create this balance where like the left side is getting hit with light, the right side is getting hit with light. Maybe it's a different color, maybe it's a shadow, whatever, but I don't want the geometry to get lost. And luckily the windows are really doing me a lot of favors in terms of selling the like angle of everything. So here I take this back building, and I really like the geometry of it, but I want it to be more dense. So I'm just kind of squishing it and then duplicating it so that it gets, the little windows get smaller, everything gets smaller, and it feels like it's further away. But I really like the shape of it. I really like it just looks unique and it looks interesting. So I'm trying to find a way, like, how can I capture the interest of that shape and have it be in the background and not be like stealing your attention away. So there's this balance of like building up the composition so that it looks interesting. There's a lot of things to look at, but your eye automatically goes to the things that I want it to go to first, second, and then third. Somebody asked in the comments, like, what would it look like at 15 frames a second? So I try that. I think it looks okay. It's a little jittery, but it does look more like an old school animation. I got the lamps and I made those. I wanted to bring those in and start building out like the lamps that fly past the camera, because that essentially is what also sells the feeling of motion. It's what makes it feel like the camera is moving. Besides the buildings doing their parallax thing, these things in the foreground is like an ultimate level of illusion in terms of like making it feel like it's moving. So basic geometry and pretty fun to model, honestly. I really like the design, and I was surprised by how much I was able to replicate based on that one angle in that one frame. I do put an area light on top because there's light coming from the emissive planes, but it's not a light that's going around. It's not, global illumination type stuff. So I'm just gonna fake that by putting another area light in this specific area, and also giving it that green tint that the material has in the reference. So here I'm just keyframing it from one side, going to the last frame, and then moving it along the Y and keyframing it again. And then just selecting everything and making it vector so that it's like a smooth, there's no easing or nothing like that. And I think it looks pretty good. There's an ease stop there, so I gotta adjust that. But yeah, this is definitely the meat of the animation here. So now after this, it's a lot of just like set dressing and adjusting the buildings and adding details and things like that. But this is a good stage to get to, and this is kind of like my goal is to once I can get here and I have all the elements where they need to be, I just don't touch the camera, I don't touch the buildings, I just leave everything as is, and then just add like little details here and there, everything. So that's what you're gonna see me doing pretty much. The animation, the building motion, the camera angle, the lamps, all of that stuff is essential, and the lighting is essentially where it's gonna be in the final animation. And so because I have these really bright lights in the foreground, to me now it's starting to kind of clash with the building emission on that edge. So I'm gonna get rid of that because it's just clashing. It's too much blue emission, and it's a cool accent, but it's just not gonna work in this scene. So I'll go select those faces and I just turn that off. So this text, I like it that it's on the top of this building, but I want to try to put it on the actual roof. So I go to my asset pack that I'm putting together currently, and it's going to be free for if you're a Patreon already, it's going to be free, and you can get it on my Gumroad later. But one of the assets that come in it is this like rooftop, billboard structure stuff. And I made it, but I think that in this scene, it's not, it's a little too thin, like you don't really see it as well. So I'm probably gonna try something and see if I can make it a little bit thicker, a little bit noticeable, just because of all the bloom and because of all the stuff going on and how small it is in the shot. You don't really see it that well, so it's almost like pointless to have it. Let me see if I add a solidify modifier, maybe it'll make it bigger. No, that breaks it. My geometry is not great. I mean, it looks very Akira, if you know what I mean. I think I'm just gonna end up remaking it totally, and it's really following Ian Hubert's tutorial. I don't know if he made a video on it or not. He did probably a while ago on how to make like these structures and stuff, and I'll post a link to that in the description. And you essentially just make like a box, and then triangulate the faces, and then add a wireframe modifier on top of it. This is another asset from that pack, which is a bunch of like little rooftop elements. You know, they're pretty good just for a distance. They're perfect for stuff like this where you don't really need to understand exactly what it is. Just know that it's some kind of rooftop stuff, like HVAC systems, whatnot. And I'm just positioning them. They look wrong from the appropriate angle, like from the top, it looks wrong. It doesn't make any sense. But again, I'm only looking at it in the right frame and making sure that it's kind of breaking up that edge, that building edge at the top, that rooftop. And then here, I took the little like red light that's at the top of one of the structures there. I noticed that was something also in the reference. I totally forgot for a while. I totally forgot to put that in, but that is all over the buildings in the Akira scene. I definitely spent a solid like 30 minutes just adding these lights. They make a huge difference. They obviously look awesome, and in the render, it's perfect. I just want to give the lights a little bit of flicker, the text I mean. Have it like flicker in a way that makes sense to me, where sometimes the LED lights or the neon lights will like, they'll kind of flicker and then they'll dim and then they'll like brighten up again and flicker again. So it's like the power is kind of going in and out. And that's all I'm doing, is like making sure that flicker happens right when that foreground building is moving out of the way, and make sure it's not really happening when you don't even see it. So this foreground building, I feel like I want to try to do something to make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm gonna shrink it, kind of squish it down so that again, like it looks like it's a lot more taller with more floors, then duplicate it and just like give it a lower section. That I think works better because it's creating a little bit of a shadow, a little bit of a break there. And so I like the light, dark, light just on this building alone. And so in the background buildings, up until now haven't really been moving at all, but I want to give them a little bit of subtle animation. Now I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the reference and I'm thinking like, I don't fully, understand how this stuff, like I'm just kind of going off of what looks right again. So like, I don't want to claim like I totally get how all this stuff works, but that's why I'm just doing a lot of these like little fine adjustments until it kind of clicks in my vision of it. Like I'm watching it. It's like you're creating an optical illusion and you're adjusting every little thing until the illusion like clicks, if that makes sense. Obviously after the recording, and you can see where I stopped, there's a little bit of a difference from where I stopped to where the final is. So this is what the final looks like after having done a little bit of more tweaking, a little bit more work. First things first is you can see that there is a little bit of an Easter egg. I don't know, I just thought it would be a little, a nice little nod to the whole scene, to the reference. It's kind of a cafe. And this is just a dark kind of, janky looking silhouetted person. I gave him the hair of Tetsuo. So just a Tetsuo-esque silhouette, not really supposed to be anything obviously specific. And then a cloth sim. So a cloth sim for the cape. And I just kind of took this plane, cut it up with the knife tool, and linked it to the character. And then have a wind here. I'll link a really good video by, I believe, CGMatter on how to do like flags and stuff. This is, it's hardly noticeable in the final, hardly noticeable, but for you, now there's what's going on over here actually. Most of the layout and most of the lighting is essentially the same. If we go into rendered view here, we can kind of get an idea of how different it looks. So I added a light, on top of here, like this really bright light, so that there's some light being cast onto the figure, but the body is still like primarily in shadow. It's just, if we look at his material, it's it's just a really basic, just like dark material. And then this is just a basic red so that it pops out. So if we go into the camera view, first thing is I adjusted this shadow maker thing a little bit more so that it encompasses, it's bigger now, I think, and encompasses more of that foreground building, which I really like. I really like this effect. And I don't know, like the shadow stuff, the shadow maker light thing is such a, it's just a happy accident. It just works kind of in an interesting way. And I just kept moving it around further after that video recording to get it so that it wasn't fully reflecting in the glass. And so I just kept kind of tweaking it, moving it around until I got this like gradient of a shadow, if that makes sense. And then the bottom here, you can see there is another light. So it's like it's casting a shadow, and then I'm casting a light on top of it. And I think that's creating a really unique effect. It almost looks a little metallic. I don't know, maybe that's just me. And down here is a much brighter, you can see area light. So it's really bright. It's really, really close. It's like clipping into the building, but it's just right up against the edge of the building. So that light is just skirting like right up against the edge and it's getting caught underneath these like edges right here. And you can start to, I don't know, it was just one of those last minute things. And I think it was trying to, the reason I put that there was because of the lamp pole. So if I turn that back on, obviously it's too far to be actually doing anything, but visually, can I kind of connect the light pole to the scene a little bit better with something like that? So the other thing is I added, if I can get them selected, yeah, these little AC vents, and these are from the pack. If you're a patron, you will definitely be getting these for free when they're out. And I just went and painstakingly just positioned them, move them around, all that kind of stuff, and I think they look pretty good. They add a little bit of more, interest to the building, a little bit more scale, because like the windows, they can be as big or small, but once you start adding real world things like signs, which is why that pack I think will help kind of make cities and mega structures seem even bigger, because they're billboards and AC units and HVAC systems and vents. Like this one is a vent. There's these like vents that I added, and I added a bit more of the HVAC from the roof, and I added it down here just to break up that this edge line. You can see here it just adds a little bit of extra information and just seems busy. And I added these vents, and some of them are kind of hanging off the edge, but it kind of looks like it makes sense. So add a bit of visual interest and visual density to this building specifically, again, because that's kind of like the main focal area. This building here, you saw that I added the little red lights on the edges. And again, I added the AC units here. Maybe like the way I'm adding them is just kind of arbitrary. I think it's all about breaking up the silhouette of this building and having the AC units catch the light in an interesting way that attracts the eye to them. One thing I wanted to mention about the shadow light, or just shadow, turn off shadows. So I know it's weird. It's basically casting a negative light, but you don't want it to cast a shadow. When I play, it creates these negative shadows, you know what I'm saying? So it's like casting a light that is a shadow. So then the shadows of that is everything light and act like a shadow, but and you don't want that. If you turn off the shadow on the negative light value, that will go away. And so then you just get that even shadow on everything. And it just kind of works as intended. And then just some of the lighting. This one ended up making a huge difference. It's this really like light beige light, and it's just hitting this edge in a way that really looks natural and nice to me. And it's not just another orange or another purple, which is really the only two colors that I was playing around with in terms of lighting. That ended up being kind of like a lucky color. I was just going through the colors until something looked right and something that fit the color palette, this pastel kind of color palette. And then in the background, it's a more softer like pink. You can see it's just this pink color, and that's being cast generally in that direction. So thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, leave them down in the comments below. If you want to see me do another anime or something like that, definitely let me know. I would love to just watch more anime shit. Why not? And get inspired, because this stuff is really cool. I'm feeling super inspired already, but always looking, to get inspired by more stuff. But anyway, regardless of that, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. And just thank you for being cool and being a fan and sticking around and like supporting this whole thing. I think it's really awesome, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.